talking about your latest poll out this week on the federal election. It's still good news for the Liberals and Mr. Carney.
It really is. We've seen 3 weeks in a row now where Carney's numbers are just rock solid. It hasn't changed. He's maintaining his polling numbers. If an election were held tomorrow, which is always the way we like to ask the questions, we can count on him getting 44% of the vote. That's flat. And the Conservatives at 37. NDP is down yet again. It's down to 8%. They started the campaign at about 12 or 13, so they've lost ground continuously. And it seems like this election campaign, at least on one hand, is not changing day by day. We've sort of fell into a pattern here, and nothing is really moving at this point.
Part of what you asked, and we know going back to, a couple of months now, it looked like the Poilievre and the Conservatives were riding high, and then came the trade war and tariffs. So you have some very interesting questions here about how people are perceiving the tariffs in Canada.
Yeah, universally, Canadians are just utterly opposed to tariffs. I mean, that has not changed. And in fact, the strength of the opposition is growing since the day that they were first announced in early February. The numbers have gone up about 8 or 9 points since then. So when I say universally, 80-something% who are opposed to the tariffs. And, one of the interesting things about the poll we did is, what are the emotions that people are feeling? And we've got 60% of Canadians feel like they're angry. They're not, there's anger, there's a bit of anxiousness, confusion. But when we look at the corresponding numbers in the USA, only about a third of Americans are angry about it. So quite a difference of opinion. And the other feeling in America is relief. 10% are saying they're relieved that tariffs are in place. So there is some support for tariffs in the USA, albeit it's still a fairly small minority.
Well, and very, very single digit support for anything tariff related amongst most of the electorate. But you broke it down by party, and Conservative supporters really stand out.
This is an interesting thing. This is where the divide in Canada is really quite something. We have Conservative voters, there's a percentage of them who actually feel that tariffs are a good thing, about 10%. It's still fairly small, but it is non-existent on the Liberal side or the NDP voter support. So it does break down to some interesting numbers for Conservative opinions.
So we are reaching, or right as we talk, we're kind of at the halfway point of the campaign. How solid are people's voting intentions with a couple of weeks to go?
Well, this is the really interesting thing. We do have some diversions of opinions there, and it's by no means a slam dunk by any stretch. The Liberals are ahead. They've maintained this lead now for 3 solid weeks in a row, but the certainty of their vote is actually quite weak relative to Conservative support. And Conservative voters tend to show up at the polling stations more, let's say, ambitiously than what Liberal voters do. So there is that factor. So let me get through some numbers here. We have, for Liberal supporters, 61% say their choice is final, but 37% say that they're open to changing their mind. And on the flip side, we've got Conservative voters at 68% saying their choice is absolutely rock solid, and only 29% saying they might change their mind. So at this point, it favors the Conservative Party voters, and it may see a bump towards the end of the campaign with Conservatives. So it's still, the election is up for grabs, that's for sure.
We have seen this collapse of the NDP vote across the country, including here in BC. And, I guess you would say, you said previously, it looks like that vote has gone to the Liberals in large part. So are those, it's difficult to say, but are those the people who still haven't made up their minds for the Liberals?
Singh's party is floundering in the polls. It's 8%. It's dropped about 4 or 5 points since the beginning of the campaign. They're really not a factor. We saw him change his tune just the other day, saying he's not running for prime minister now. He's really looking for a place in the opposition. So there is a change in the perspective of even the staunchest of NDP supporters. But it's not a big enough swing. The drop in NDP support, a few percentage points, yes, that might have helped the Liberals for sure, because we're not seeing any NDP supporters going to the Conservative side. So it's certainly helped, but it's a fairly small number.
So what is it then, if you hazard a guess, what is it that people are waiting for before they make up their minds?
Well, they're waiting to see the tariff situation play out. It is a one election issue. Up until the tariffs, it was non-existent on the agenda. and we poll Canadians, we ask them what's the most important issue facing the country, and it's something like 42% say that it's the most important issue. So by number one by far, and with the announcement of Trump just today, and it seems to change by the day, of a 90-day reprieve, the issue is still on the table. So that actually favors the Liberal Party. It means that the issue is not going to be resolved. If it had been resolved with a universal, number that was announced between now and the end of the election, it might have changed it to maybe other important issues would creep up. But no, the tariffs are number one. They will stay number one. Trump guaranteed that by booking it out 90 days. And unfortunately for the Conservative Party, it is seen by Canadians that Carney is better suited to handle Trump by quite a large margin, by about 20 or 30 points differential overall in the Canadian electorate. They feel that he is the best solution to handle President Trump, the best solution for handling tariffs. His resume speaks to that. And that's a real disadvantage for Poilievre, who doesn't really have a solid platform to go on other than tariffs as well.
Right. And he has tried in the last couple of weeks different messaging, as you know, around housing affordability. And this week he's out talking about crime and law and order. But can any of that move the needle for him in this one issue election?
Yeah, he can't seem to shake it. And the other thing that's happened in this campaign, and we've seen little bits and pieces of it through our polling, is that his biggest downfall is he's considered too much like Trump. And that is really a tough image to shake. And despite his best efforts of saying, I'm not Trump, I am different, it doesn't really pass the sniff test with voters. They're not really believing it. They point to different things in the party that are very similar to what Trump is saying, and they're not really buying it.
Carney is new to most Canadians. I mean, he's the new leader here. So do they know enough about him yet, or are they still discovering him? Is there an opportunity, I guess, for him to grow, but also potentially decline once people get to know him better?
Well, we haven't seen, at least on the attack ads that the Conservatives are running, people aren't really buying into the idea that he's just the same old Liberal Party. They really kind of see him as a fresh approach, the non-politician who's taken over. And so that's not really working. And they haven't found any major holes in his resume or his his past that are rocking voters to the core in any shape or form. Like, there's not enough dirt on him at this point to cause concern. So that is not really being an effective part of the campaign at this point.
So then, looking ahead, before we talk next week, what should viewers be watching for in terms of the messaging?
The announcements on the Trump tariffs change by the day, and today was a pretty big one. The stock market has taken a massive reprieve and gone back up by about 8 points the last I looked. And so do Canadians then see that the issue is off the table? I don't think they will, but there is a potential that they might see that, the issue is partly resolved. Maybe there's room for other issues in this election campaign. That's to watch for. We'll also see if there's any movement in Carney support as you get closer to the election. Presumably what happens is the number of undecideds, the number of people who say that they will switch their vote, shrinks. And in this case, it's hard to tell whether that 30-something% is movable, but that's something we'll watch for sure.
Or whether they show up at the polls. I guess that's always the other issue, as you say.
That is, we do our polling, Harold. We have about 80-something% who say they're going to show up, and we know in the best case scenario, it's in the mid 60s. So we always lose that intention as people get to voting day. It's one of the trickiest parts of being a pollster is trying to figure out that gap and who's actually going to show up. But we were chatting earlier before this call, and Conservative voters tend to show up more so than Liberal voters. Liberal voters tend to be a bit younger. It's the 50 plus crowd on the Conservative side that tend to reliably show up at the polling station. So they might get a little showing up at the polling station bump in the final days of the campaign and maybe election day itself. So the race is still up for grabs, and we'll be tracking it right through, and we'll look forward to talking next week.
All right. Thanks again, Steve.
Excellent. Thanks, Harold.